So hello everyone, welcome back to my channel. My name is Tanuj. So in this video we are going to learn TypeScript by building one big project. Okay, big project, I mean we are going to write a lot of code, but the application that we are building is very simple. Okay, so we are just going to build a simple to-do app. If I just show you the demo of the application, so this is just a simple to-do app which just has few input fields like the title, description and the hours to complete. So when we click on add to do, it will add in the in progress to do's, and also we can just drag and drop. Okay, so if I just show you a demo, so let's say give the title as test and give it a test description. Okay, and give the time hours to complete as 2. So if I click on add to do, you see that this will add inside a box with the title, description and the hours to complete. Okay, so this is also a feature where we can drag and drop, okay, from in progress to completed to do's. Okay, so it's just a simple to do app, and also we are going to add in a lot of validations and a lot of complex stuff that is going behind the scenes within this particular project that we are going to build. So we are going to implement TypeScript of course, and we are going to learn each and every feature that TypeScript has within this one particular project. Okay, so trust me, this course is going to be fully packed with TypeScript, and don't worry if you just don't know much about TypeScript. If you just know a little bit, or if you don't even know, till you will get exposed to TypeScript along the way, and I will be explaining each and a single bit of this application by building using TypeScript. Okay, so let's get started. You will also find the starting code of this particular project within my GitHub repository, which you will find within the link in the description below. Okay, so you can just navigate there and you can just clone my repository and you are good to get started. All right, so let's get started with this video. So if you have any questions or any queries, you can just let me know in the comments. I'll just try to answer them. And also, if you would like to learn a specific feature in TypeScript within this project, there's also timestamps provided within this video, so you can just jump around and learn that particular feature that we are going to implement within this application. Okay, so with that said, let us get started. So the first step is you can navigate to my GitHub repository, and you can just clone this particular repository to your local development environment, and there you can just install all the dependencies, and you can just get started. Okay, so I already have the starter files for this particular project, so you can just I'll just walk you through step by step what do we actually have within our setup file. So you see that we have a simple index.html file which has a title of to do app and a link to our CSS file. Okay, so this is the CSS which will already be included in the starter files. And also, let me just zoom in a little. So we have a script tag which will point at the app.js within our dist file. So basically, when we compile our file from TypeScript to plain JavaScript, so all of our source code will be available within this dist folder, and later it will be compiled and viewed in our browser. Okay, so I'll also show you how we can achieve this step. And later within our body, we just have few template tags. Okay, so template tag, let me just make it clear, it will not initially be visible inside our browser. So it will be later picked up by JavaScript or TypeScript, and it will control the behavior of this particular template and show it within the browser. Okay, so initially if you just run this particular index.html file, you will not see this particular form, but you will it will be there, but we just need to use this as a template. Okay, so later we are going to use JavaScript or TypeScript in order to pick up this template. And also we have 3 template tags. So the first one is for the form itself. So we have 3 input fields. One is for the title, description and the hours to complete. Okay, so these 2 are going to be input fields, and this is going to be a number field where we just need to provide a number to add in the number of hours, and also a button to add a to do. Okay, so when you click on this button, it will add the to do. And also we have another template tag which with the id single to do. So this is nothing but it will just create a single to do and in the form of a box. Okay, and later this single to do will be appended within this to do's list. Okay, so you see we have another template here with an unordered list, and later we are going to use this template to insert all the to do's within this list. Okay, so this is a list and this is a single to do. Okay, so these are the 3 template tags within our index.html. And finally we have this div, okay, with an id of app, and later through JavaScript or TypeScript we are just going to append all the rendered template tags within this div. Okay, so whatever the content we have, we are just going to append within this empty div tag. Okay, with the help of JavaScript or TypeScript. And also we have this tsconfig file which I have already done some configuration by adding the libraries for this. So that is a DOM, since we are interacting with the HTML DOM, and then we are going to use ES6 and also DOM iterable and type host. Okay, so these are all the libraries or lib or set of bundle libraries, declaration files that describe the target runtime environment. Okay, so I have set the root directory to be the source. Okay, so TypeScript will compile all those files within the source directory, and the out directory, as of course I have given to this dist folder. Okay, so all of our compiled code will be available within this dist folder. Okay, and this dist folder itself we are has a file called app.js, which initially which will be actually empty. For now we don't have anything, so this will actually be served to our browser to render the contents of this. Okay, so I hope that's clear. So if I just show you the package.json, we have a start script which will run the light server, so basically the live server, which will keep tracking changes for within our file, and then it will show us the fresh data. So I just wanted to show you what exactly we have within our startup file, so that you just don't get confused later. And yeah, this is the point of our this is our entry point where we'll be writing all of our TypeScript code within this one file, and later after this video we are just going to reorganize or refactor the particular functionality into its own files. Okay, so that we just don't have a complete mess within this file. And so with that said, if I just start my development server, so I can just type in npm start or npm run start. Okay, so this will open the particular application in localhost 3000. As you see, we do not have anything. Okay, since we have used the template tags, and later it will be picked up by JavaScript or TypeScript to render the form or rest of the elements. Okay, so if I just show you the particular console, so we do not have anything within our elements tab, even though we have this template, okay, with our form over there. Okay, so this is all I wanted to say. So let's now get started by writing some TypeScript code within our app.ts. So let us now fetch the template tags, so basically the form, which is input form, and then render it on our browser. Okay, so what we just do is we take this form and then append it within our div with an id app. So this is what is actually showing our content within our browser. Okay, so let's get that. So we are going to use object oriented programming to build this particular project, so that I can explain you each and every feature that we have within TypeScript, and also how TypeScript works within object oriented programming. Okay, so of course you can just feel free to use anything apart from object oriented programming as well, using the traditional functions and loops, whatever you use. Okay, so since for the sake of learning TypeScript within the entire JavaScript world, so I am just using the object oriented approach. Okay, so let us first create a class, and let's call this to do input. Okay, so since I'm getting the input form from the DOM, so I'm just use a class name to do input, and let's initialize the constructor. And within this constructor, so basically the constructor function will be called once we create an instance of this to do input, right? So let us create the input form by making access of its id. Okay, so you see that we have given an id of to do input. So let us store that within a variable, or let's say this dot template or template element, and set that equal to document dot get element by id, and then pass in the value of to do input. Okay, so let's verify that, yeah, to do input. So I can just copy that and paste in here, and this will get the template element, and we just see that we are getting a error from TypeScript. Okay, so saying that this particular template element doesn't exist on type to do input. Okay, so basically this is a simple class, we are not extending it anywhere else. Okay, so this doesn't have any field called template element, so we just need to create a field within this class called template element. Okay, and then insert the type for that. Okay, so let's set template element and infer the type of that to be HTML template element. Okay, so HTML template element. Okay, so this is we are telling TypeScript that this is going to be a template element, and we can just now access this. Okay, but still we are getting a TypeScript error, but this is a different error saying that this could possibly be null. Okay, because TypeScript doesn't know your what is there within your HTML file, whether this particular template tag is even there. So we can just tell TypeScript that don't worry about this. We can just by providing a exclamation mark, or if you want, you can also put an if check over here by checking if that first exists and then render this particular line of code. If not, we can, sure, TypeScript gives us an error, but since I already added the exclamation mark, this is giving again a different type of error, saying that this is of type HTML element and not of type HTML template element. Okay, so since we set the type of this to HTML template element, by default TypeScript will interpret this particular type as HTML element. Okay, so we need to explicitly tell TypeScript that this is going to be a HTML template element. Okay, so we can just copy this and we can just set this to as and then pass in the HTML template element. Okay, so this should be HTML template element like this, and yeah, you see that now the error is gone. Okay, and also another way of doing this is you can just use within angle brackets, okay, just like you use generics in TypeScript, and then in further type like this. Okay, and you can just get rid of this, but I will just stick to this approach. Okay, so I hope this is clear. So now let us get the host element, that is the div with an ID of app. So we can just set this dot host element and set that to document dot get element by ID and pass in the value of app. Okay, so this is by ID called app, and also let's define the field over here. So host element and set the type of that to HTML div element. Okay, so we can just leave it at HTML element. Just we can be specific, saying that this is going to be a div element, and now it says that this can be a HTML element or null. So we can just infer the type of this to we can just say TypeScript that this will always be available. So we can by putting an exclamation mark, or you can put an if check if you want, and also let's set the type of this to HTML div element. Okay, like this, and yeah, so we are good to go now. So now let us get the particular template by accessing the form that we have within our template. So how we do that is we use a function within the document object called as import node. Okay, just like we have a function called get element by ID to get the particular element by ID, and we can just do the same for to import a node. Okay, so basically from the template tag. So let's store it within a variable called imported node and set that to document dot import node. Okay, so you also get some suggestions by the way, and now we need to pass in this template element. So this dot template element, and then we just need to pass in the content. Okay, so not just the template element but the contents of that. Okay, and this will take in two parameters. So this is the first is the content, and we just need to tell if we want a shallow clone or a deep clone. Okay, so we need to you see that we need to specify a boolean value. So if you want all the contents after this form inside this input element, so we need to specify true over here. Okay, so we also want the inner elements of this particular template. So once we have done that, we can now create the actual HTML form element. So this is just the node, so we just access that by the first element child. Okay, so since we already created a variable, so we can store this within a element property, not host element, and then pass the imported node dot first element child. Okay, so we can also create the field for that. So let's set element and set this to HTML form element this time. Okay, so since it's a form tag that we are rendering, so HTML form element. Okay, so the reason why we are doing this, we are going to get some type suggestions on also type safety. Okay, so since we are saying TypeScript that this is also always going to be a form element. Okay, so we are getting an error here, and here we just need to again infer the type to the HTML form element. Okay, like this, and yeah, so once we have grabbed the element, now we just need to append that to the div with an ID of app, right? So within the host element. Okay, so let's do that. So this dot host element, and then we have certain properties like insert adjacent element. Okay, so insert adjacent element, and then we just need to pass in a value of that. Okay, so where do we want to exactly place this? Okay, so we get 4 different values, so we want to place this after beginning. Okay, so then we just pass in the what do we want to exactly place, so that is the element itself, so we access that by this dot element. Okay, sorry, this should be before end. Okay, so once I save this and try to compile my file, so to compile we can just open another terminal and just type in tsc. Okay, so make sure you are in the root of the particular folder, that the working folder, and then we pass in -w. Okay, so to the tsc-b. Okay, so to build all of our TypeScript files to JavaScript. Okay, so once we do that, you see that within our dist folder, before I showed you that the app.js was empty, so now we just have within this particular file over here. Okay, so this is basically a file where we support JavaScript syntax in different types of browsers. Okay, so just a side note over there. So this is a JavaScript file which will be ultimately picked up by this HTML file, so by accessing the dist/app.js. Okay, so let's initialize the class todo input by saying new todo input. Alright, so now if I just save this file and try to compile this code again. Okay, so by running tsc-b. Okay, so this is going to compile our code to JavaScript, and now if we go back to our browser, we see our form over there. Okay, so we are missing some styles over here. Okay, so if you see the demo of our project, so you see we have a border over here and with some light background color. Okay, so the reason is, you see within our app.css file we have defined a particular class name for the input for the entire form. Okay, so it's right here with the id property called user input. Okay, so that is what exactly it's not being applied. So what we can just do is we can just set the id of that. So we can just do that by this dot element dot id and set that equal to hashtag user input. Okay, so by this we are attaching a property on a particular HTML form element, and this is how we exactly do it. Okay, so now if I just go back and see our application, and first of all we need to build our application by tsc-b, and also you can just attach a property called for -- watch, which will watch constantly for our file changes, and then it will rebuild again. So now if I just go back and try to refresh, so sorry, this should just be user input, since we are directly accessing the id of that, so we don't need to provide hash. So now if we just build this again and go back, so we should be able to see the border over there with some styling. Okay, so it has taken the entire width. So as we keep adding those two sections for the started projects and the finished projects, then this will come to the side and we'll give space for those two sections. Okay, so this is all about rendering a template tag within our HTML page. Okay, so what I want to do now is get access to all these 3 input elements and also this button, such that when I click on this button, it should log the responses to the console. Okay, whatever we type in here. So I just wanted to show you a weird behavior and how I can use TypeScript to overcome this. Okay, so let us select that using the id of these input fields, like for the title, description, and the hours to complete with the id of hours. Okay, so let's go back and create a field for that. So let's set this title input element and set that to HTML input element. Okay, so this is going to be an input element this time, so HTML input element, and let's duplicate the same for the rest of the input fields. So this is going to be a description input element, and also the description, and finally the hours. Okay, so with that done, we can get that using the query selector. Okay, or you can even use get element by id. So I just want to use the query selector this time. So we set this dot title input element and set the value of document dot get the query selector, and then we want to select based on the id, that is title, and we just assure that we are having a title property, and we can just assign the type to HTML input element. Okay, so nothing new, we can just do the same for the description as well as for the hours. So I'm just going to replace this with description. all right, and the same for the hours. Okay, all right, so once this is done, we have access to our input elements. Sorry, this should not be the document but the form element that we just created. So this dot element, okay, which has a type of form element, and we can push this element at the top. Okay, sorry for this mistake. And yeah, so now we can by getting access to these input elements, we can now add an event listener whenever we submit the form. So it should call a particular function, and we are going to log the input values over there. Okay, so let us go right below this and just access the form element by this dot element, and we have a property called add event listener. Okay, so we listen for the submit event. Okay, since this is a form element, so the TypeScript will also give us help over here. And then once we listen for this event, we are just going to call a function which we are just going to create by this dot submit handler. Okay, so submit handler, and let's create that function which is going to be a private method. Okay, private method or function. So let's go inside this class and create a private method called as submit handler, and then we just pass in the event, and then this is going to be of type event, and then we are just going to prevent the default behavior of the browser, like which makes a post request to submit the form. So let's use the e.prevent default, and then we are going to log the values to the console. Okay, so for now I just want to log the title whatever we have input. So we can console log this dot title input element and access the value of it. Okay, so I just want to show you a weird behavior of submitting this form. So now if I just rebuild my file and go back, so tsc-b, and now if we just go back and open our console, now if I just type in the title of, let's say, test, and hit on submit. Okay, so now if I go to the console, so it says that it cannot read properties of undefined. Okay, so the reason for this is this keyword. Okay, so this keyword which we are attaching to the submit handler is basically adding to this particular event. Okay, and it's not pointing at the particular object. Okay, so it is pointing at the event, specifically the target of the event, and that is where we get the value from, right? So I can just prove that to you by just console logging this to the console. So if I just rebuild my file and then go back and then click on add to do, you see that this is pointing at the form. Okay, so this is basically the submit event, and this doesn't actually point at the object. Okay, so we can use the bind function on particular events to point this keyword to this particular class instead of the event. Okay, specifically the target. So how we can do that? We can just specify the bind method which we have on JavaScript. So basically this is used to point this keyword to somewhere else. Okay, so we just want to point at this particular class, okay, or this particular instance of the class. So let's point that to bind and to this. Okay, and once I save this and recompile, and now if I just click on the particular add to do, you see that now it is pointing to the input element. Okay, so now we can have access to this particular form and specifically whatever we have values in it. Okay, so if I type in a particular title and then click on add to do, so I can just access this variable or this particular input field easily. Okay, so you get that from the title, the input element, and access the value property. Okay, so it should be somewhere here in the value property. So it's right here. Okay, so this is how you can point this keyword to your class, and this is nothing new in TypeScript. So this is just plain JavaScript, and also I'll just show you a TypeScript feature which makes it very easy. And instead of using this bind keyword, every single event listener you define within this class, and I can just show you a simpler way how you can easily achieve this. You don't have to do this, but this is a good feature to add on when you're using TypeScript. Okay, so that is called as decorators. Okay, so you would have heard of decorators somewhere when you're using Java or Python, and using such decorators is basically modifies the behavior of a particular function. Okay, so I just want to modify this particular method over here. So instead of pointing this keyword to the event over here, I just want to point it to the particular class instance. Okay, so we can just do that by creating a function right at the top. Okay, so we can just give a meaningful name, like let's say auto bind. Okay, so and then this will take in 3 arguments. Okay, so basically the decorators which wherever you add depends on where actually you add. Okay, so you can add directly on classes, then you can add on methods, you can add on accessor elements. So this is how you can based on, since we are doing this for the particular method inside a class, so we receive 3 particular arguments. So the first one is basically the target. So basically it points at the prototype of the method we are using, so we can specify that to target. And for now we can just set the type of any, because I also want to log the particular argument and show you in the console. And then we have the second argument as the name of the particular method that we are using inside a class, so that is name, or we can say method name. And then finally we have the descriptor. Okay, so we can just call this anything. So this is a usual convention when you are using decorators, so descriptor, and this is going to be of type property descriptor. Okay, so it's over here, and this is descriptor. So this will contain the actual method that we have defined within wherever we are using the decorator. So how do we use this decorator? By just putting at the rate and then specifying the name of the function, that is auto bind. Okay, so auto bind, so we can use it like this. And also let's specify the type of this. So this is going to be of type string. So basically this is the method name that we are applying this decorator to, and inside this let us log the values of these 3 arguments. So that is a target, and set that to target, and also the same for the method name and the descriptor. So I have added console logs for these 3 arguments, and it's giving me an error here saying that so the reason why we are getting this error is we have not configured TypeScript to use decorators. Okay, so how would we do that? We can go to the tsconfig file and we can just search for decorators, and then just uncomment this particular line of code. Okay, so experimental decorators, and set that value to true. Okay, so now if I just save this file and go back, so this error should go away. Okay, so now this particular file is configured to use decorators. Okay, so now if I just log the values and show you, so before that let me just build and go back. So now if I just show you that, you see that we get a target. So this is basically the prototype function, so which has the constructor and the submit handler, which is the actual event itself. Okay, so these are all the prototypes which are defined within our class, and the method name, of course, it's submit handler that we named, and this is the descriptor. Okay, so we are interested in this particular function which has a property said configurable to true and enumerable to false, and this is a value property. Okay, where we actually get the original method. Okay, so by using this method we can override the behavior of this particular method that we are receiving. Okay, so I just wanted to show you this. So let's now go back and do the overriding of the original behavior with the behavior that we want to expect. So we get that original method by this the descriptor dot value. So let's original method and set that to descriptor dot value. All right, and here we can now set our own descriptor, like let's say adjusted descriptor, adj descriptor, and then set the value to the configurable to true. Okay, so of course we need to specify that, which was already there within our original method. So and set that to true. Okay, so let's also specify the type for this. So TypeScript is not giving me suggestions because of that. So always it's a good idea to give a type for this, so TypeScript can help us. So that is going to be the property descriptor, just as we defined here. All right, and after this we specify a accessor called get. Okay, so let's fix this, and we need to specify that by the get function, and within this we are going to now override. Okay, so let's create a bound function. So this is the function which we will just take from the original method and then call the bind method on this. Okay, and then bind this keyword to the particular class instance, and then we just need to return this particular function. Okay, so by returning we are bound function. So this will always point at the class instance and instead of the event. Okay, so also we need to finally return this adjustable descriptor, okay, which will actually override the original method. So let's return that. And yeah, so now we can just get rid of this bind method directly, which are applied on submit handler, the title input element, and access the value of that as I showed you. Okay, so now if I just save this and rebuild, now if I just type in a title and click on add, so still this doesn't work. Maybe I just made a mistake. Sorry, I just returned the original method itself instead of the adjusted descriptor. And once I save this and recompile, and now if I just give it a test, and yeah, okay, so this decorator is actually working. So don't forget to configure your TypeScript file with setting this experimental decorators to true, and only then will your decorators in this TypeScript file work. Okay, so I hope you understood how you can use a decorator. So this is just a trivial example of how you can use a decorator just like this. So I just wanted to show you, just because we are learning TypeScript in this particular project. And yeah, so let's now move ahead with the next feature. So apart from just console logging, I also want to add in some validations so that the user cannot add a to do with the empty title, okay, empty title description or hours to complete. Okay, so apart from just logging, we need to add that validation too, and let's get started with that. So let us now create a private method inside our class to get all the user inputs. Okay, so that is the title, description, and the hours. Okay, and then we can just call that method and store within a variable, okay, which will contain all of our user inputs within a array. Okay, so I'll just show you a simple TypeScript feature which we can implement over here, that is tuples, okay, or tuples, however you may call it. So let us create a function. So this is going to be a private function, okay, or a private method. So this private method is a method which can only be called by inside this class. Okay, so it cannot be called from anywhere outside the class. Okay, so if I already created the instance of this to do input, right, so after I create that, I cannot do the private method. So this will throw an error, okay, from TypeScript. So that is why we use private. So by default it is public, which you do not have to mention that public, something like that. And also there is something called protected, okay, which I will also implement this feature later in this course. And let us now create a private variable called get user input. Okay, and this is going to take in nothing, but it is going to return 3 values. Okay, so this is going to return a tuple. Okay, so what is a tuple? It is basically an array of fixed size, okay, or we cannot add in or remove elements within the array, and also the type of each element within the array will be fixed. Okay, so the return type is going to be 3 elements. So the first one is going to be a string, and which is the title, okay, and also the description, which is going to be a string, and for the number of hours, this is going to be number. Okay, so if I just try to return something like apart from string or number within this array, so this is going to throw an error based on the particular values that we provide. So if I provide a number instead of a string for a title, it's going to give us an error. Okay, so this is a fixed length, and also if I pass in 4 elements, also it's going to give me an error because this is a tuple which is of fixed size. Okay, so let's grab the title. So I'm going to call this entered title and set this equal to this dot the title input element, and we need to grab the value of that. Okay, and let's also do the same for the description and the number of hours as well. So this is going to be entered description. All right, and also for the hours. Okay, and let's make this lowercase. Alright, so once we have grabbed all the values, I just want to return these 3 values. So I can just return in the form of an array which is similar of this particular type that we have assigned, that is a tuple. And let's pass in the entered title and then the entered description and also the number of hours. Okay, so just the entered hours. Okay, so since this is an hours which is all by default going to be in the form of a string, we need to explicitly convert this to a number. Okay, so we can just wrap this within a parse int or parse float. Okay, and a shorter way of doing this is by just adding a plus in front of the entered hours. Okay, so this will convert the string to a number, and you see that we do not get any errors from TypeScript, okay, since we are obeying this particular thing. Okay, so and also if I just try to add in another element, okay, so of let's say a string, so this is going to throw us an error, okay, saying that this particular type doesn't obey this type that we assign to this. Okay, so we are adding an additional string, so TypeScript is going to yell at us with that context. Okay, so this is how you can create tuples just for type safety, and in case you any user adds in another element within this array, so it should throw in an error. Okay, so TypeScript definitely helps us in that way. And now we can go to the submit handler and there make a call to this method, okay, and destructure all those values. So right over here I'm just going to get rid of the console log, and instead I'm going to destructure the three values, that is the title, description, and then the hours, that is coming from the method that we just created, that is get user input. Sorry, this is this dot get user input. And yeah, so by this we get the title, description, and hours, and we can just console log these values. Okay, so the title, description, and hours. Okay, so now we can just have a look. So I am going to put the TypeScript compiler in watch mode. Okay, so whenever we make a change, it should rebuild and give us a fresh output. So I can put that by just adding -- watch, and this will constantly detect for any changes. And now if we just go back to our application and just open our console, and we can just type in some title, some description, and also some number of hours, and click on add to do, we see that we get the output. Okay, so this is how you create tuples inside or tuples inside TypeScript. So now I just want to add in validations to my input form. Okay, so with an empty title, if I just add to do, you see that it still accepts without throwing any error, saying that the title must be provided. So let us add in that particular feature where we can validate the form inputs. So we can do that right within this get user input method, and before we return these values, we need to make a check if all these values are provided. So now we can check if the entered title dot trim, just to trim the white spaces and calculate the length of that, and if that is equal to 0, then also we need to do the check for the other two input values as well. So I'm just going to use a OR operator over here and try to check for the other two as well. Alright, so when we have an invalid input, we can just throw in alert saying that we need to input all values. So please enter all fields. Alright, and we can just return from the function. Okay, and when we can now put an else, so if all the inputs are valid, then we return this tuple. Okay, so we can put this at the top, and we are getting an error here from TypeScript. So it says that this function can also return undefined, but we have returned a tuple. Okay, so we can also put in a union type here and saying that this could also return void or undefined. Okay, so you can also put in undefined, and void is the most generic term which is also most used. So I'm typing here void. Okay, so but we are just telling TypeScript that this can either return a tuple or nothing. Okay, so we need to check that if the returned value is tupled or undefined. Okay, so we do not have any function or a type check to check if the returned value is a tuple or a undefined. Okay, so we do not have any function to that, like saying to check if this is a type of a tuple or something like that. So what we can just do is we can just check if the return value is an array. Okay, so because we are just having two possibilities, either we return an array or we return nothing. Okay, so let us just check if we can use the array constructor, and this has a property called isArray. Okay, so this is used to check whatever is passed in inside here is an array or not. Okay, so first let us store this within a variable, and let's call this user input. Okay, and then check if the user input is an array. Okay, and only then do we destructure these values. This should be user input. Alright, So yeah, so we can also put the console log right at the top. Okay, so now we have added in the validations. Okay, so now if we just go back to our browser and just open our console, and we can now just test this out. So if I just click on add to do, it gives us this alert window saying please enter all fields. All right, so now if I just type in a description and the title, also the number of hours, so it should be able to add that to do. Okay, so we have added validations, but we do not want to just limit validations just for the form input, but anywhere else. Okay, so we just want to create a generic input validator, so that we can use this particular function in all other places. Okay, so let us create that function to validate all our inputs. Okay, and also by adding some additional properties like the minimum length, the maximum length, and is it required or not, all of that. Okay, so let us create a function called validate right above the class. Okay, so let's call it validate, and this is going to take in a type which we are going to define it customly. Okay, so this is we just need to specify an interface which is going to describe the object that is going to be passed in as an argument to this validate function. Okay, so we can just pass in the argument as, let's say, validate input or validatable input, like this. Alright, and now let's create the type. So for the type we can use two ways. Okay, either we create an interface or we can create a type. Okay, so if you're using a type, we just say type and then type in the name. So let's call this validatable, and then set this with an equal to, and then assign the key and the value. Okay, so the key is going to be the object within the key, and specify the type for that. Okay, so there's also another way of using interfaces. Okay, so interface, and we do not have an equal to symbol over here. Okay, so that's the only difference. So we can just type in our validatable input fields. Okay, like what is the value, is it required, and all of that stuff. So let us start with the value, which is going to be of type string or number. So value, that is either going to be string or number. Alright, and next is the required field. Okay, so you don't have to add a comma over here, just like objects. So we just this is not a JavaScript object, so this is just a type interface. Okay, then later we just want to assign this to this input that we are receiving as arguments to this function. Okay, so that is required, and set that to going to be a boolean. Okay, so we need to pass in true or false values for this. So this is required. So next we have is the min length and the max length, which are only applicable for checking the string lengths. Okay, so min length, and set this to a type number. Okay, so we are going to receive a number to check the minimum length, and the same for the maximum length. So max length, and also we need two more properties to check the length of a number. Okay, so that we can just call it min and set that also to a number, and also for the max. Okay, so max, and yeah, this is all the required fields for to check anything if it is a valid input or not. Okay, so and also these fields are completely optional. Okay, so we can also do validation just by passing the value, but that doesn't make sense. So we are this can also be undefined. We do not want to check if this is required or not. Okay, so for that we can just put in a or operator, and just also it can say that we can also pass in undefined as this. Okay, so we can also put in a question mark like this. So by this we can telling TypeScript that this is going to be either boolean or undefined. Okay, you can use anyways. So and all of these properties are also going to be optional. Okay, so this is by adding a question mark right before the colon, and we have created the particular type of object that we will be receiving as the function parameter. Also what you can just do is you can just put in a shortcut like this by specifying all the methods. So I just want to use this everywhere else, so I just want to directly use it as a type like this by creating an interface. So let's set validatable, and here this is going to be a function, sorry, not const, and this is going to just return a true or false value. So we can just assign that return type to be as boolean. Okay, and let us set initially the value of the is valid to true. Okay, and then we are going to put in certain conditions just to test if this is a passing, and then we change the value to false, and then we return that if it is invalid. Okay, so let's initialize a variable called is valid and set that initially to true. okay, and inside this we are just going to put in some if checks and first check if the input is required or not. So since we have also added this property here, so let's check if validatable input dot required, if that value is provided, then we do the validation check. So what we just do is we set the value of is valid to first whatever the value is there and put in an AND operator and saying that if the validatable input dot value, okay, whatever value we pass in, and first we need to convert that to a string, right, even though it's a number. So just to check the length of that, so to string, and here we trim the white spaces dot trim, and then we check the length of that if that is greater than or if that is not equal to 0, okay, like this, and we return that, okay. So if this particular value is false, so even the is valid gets false since we are using the AND operator here, and then we set the value of is valid back to false, okay, and also we do the other checks as well, and then we return from the function. So we can just return is valid without checking for other input parameters. So we should not return like this. So this will also return even if the is valid is true. So we set if is valid is a falsy value, and then we return like this, okay. So this doesn't seem to work. So now we move on to check if the min length is provided. So we check that from validatable input dot min length, and also we need to check that if the input type is a string, okay. So this is not valid for numbers, so we check that from the type of, okay. So this is not TypeScript specific, so this is also can also be used in JavaScript just to check the type of the particular value or a constant. So let's check that value if that is equal to a string. So we do that like this, okay. So this will return a string if it is a string and number if it is a number in the form of this, and only this if this is true, then we make the validation. So we check the is valid and we compare that to the old value, and then we put the condition here saying that if validatable input dot value, and check the length of that, and the length of that should be lesser than or equal to the validatable input dot min length, okay. So this whatever the min length is provided for this to check this value, okay. So this should be equals, and this works fine. However, the min length, so what if it the min length is provided as 0, okay. So that will also become a falsy value. So we only need to check for null or undefined, okay. So what I can just do is I can just check if that is a falsy value by just putting if not equal to null or undefined. So I'm just using one equal to just to check for a falsy value, or what you can just do is you can use the nullish coalescing operator by using 2 question marks, but that will become a little more complicated for this. So I am just going to put this like this. So if it is a falsy value, then we are not going to make this check over here, okay. So that's done. We can also do the same for the max length, okay. So I'll just duplicate this line of code and also just replace this with max length. Oops, this should just be max length, okay. And now we just need to put this as greater than or equal to I'm sorry, this is the minimum length, right? So it should be greater than the value and this should be lesser than the value. So sorry for that. And now we have checked the minimum length and maximum length if a string is passed in, and also let's do the same for numbers, okay. So we have given these two types also with min and max, so which is going to be checked for numbers. So let us do the same here. So I can just duplicate this, and I know I should not make a lot of duplication, but just to save time and not make you bored, I'm just doing this. So this is just going to be the min, and that should not be equal to null, and also this should be of type number, okay. So only if a number is passed in, we are going to do this validation, and we do not have the length property on numbers, so we can get rid of that. And now we just check for the min value, okay. So now let's do the same for here as well. So that is for the max, and this should be of type number, and we do not have a length property on numbers, and check for the max value that is provided for this, okay. So yeah, that's looking good. And finally we just need to return the value of the is valid, okay. So is valid, so if any one of these conditions fail, the value of is valid will be set back to false and we return that value, okay. So initially that's why we set this to true, okay. So now it's like you're giving an interview for a company. Initially you'll be done your screening, then you have your initial round of assessment, then you have your like coding round, then you have your technical round, then you have your HR round, and finally you get selected. It's somewhat like that. Okay, just you can just think of this analogy. So now we can use this function to validate our input. So let's go to the get user input, and let's create variables to check if the 3 input elements that we entered are valid. So I'm just going to first check for the title, so I can just call this is valid title and set that equal to let's pass in the value first. Okay, and this is going to be of type entered, sorry, this the value is going to be the entered title, and also this is going to be required. Okay, so we can just set required to true. Okay, and also we need to assign the type for that, that is going to be validatable of this class. Okay, so if you don't assign this class, you won't get any suggestions. Just I was not getting it. Okay, so first you it is always a good practice when first you assign the type of that, so that you get some suggestions. Okay, so I didn't get, so also I can just press control space or something like that. You also get other properties as well, so you get max length. So these are all the properties that I just defined within this interface. So once you assign the type for that, okay, so if you just hover on this, you get the type of that is validatable. Okay, so this is how you can need to do in TypeScript. And also let's do the same for the other 2 inputs. So is valid description and is valid hours. Okay, so for is valid description, we are passing in the value of string, and this is also going to be of true value, and I want the description to just be a minimum value of, let's say, 10 characters. Okay, so like there should not be any less than 10 characters, so I can just put in a min length. Okay, not just min, so this is just going to be 10. Okay, and so if we add in a description less than 10 values, so we are just going to get an error. I guess just for testing you can just put it as 5. Okay, and just to now check if the valid hours is, and just to check that if we are providing valid hours, so we can just put in the minimum value. So minimum is going to be 1 and the maximum is going to be let's say 10. Okay, so we cannot have to do's more than 10 hours. Okay, so you're just wasting your time. So instead of doing this, we can call the validate function and then pass in the all these 3 values. So is valid title first, and if that is not true, then we are going to fail this if condition and then show this alert. And let's do the same for the description as well. So validate and then pass in this valid description, and if that value is not true, and let's do the same for hours. Alright, so this will do the checking and we don't need this. So once this is done, we can now go back and test if this is working. Okay, so now I can just give it a refresh and just add in some title. Okay, so if I just add in an empty title and click add to do, yes, there we go. So our validation function is working well and good. So it says please enter all fields. So if I just add in title, but description, if I just add in 4 characters and add in the number of hours, this doesn't seem to work. Sorry, I forgot to change this to entered description and also this entered hours. So this is what happens if you just copy paste and you forget to change the values. So once if I just refresh this and add in a title and a description, let's say 4 characters and hours to complete, and click on add to do, yeah, so maybe you need to give a better message, so invalid inputs or something like that. So yeah, anyways, our validation is actually working. So if I just type in another character and fulfill the condition, and that gets added. Okay, and if I just do not type in the number of hours to complete, we still get the error. And if I just type in a title, so if I just make the title required as false, and now if I just type in an empty title and give it a description and hours to complete, so if I just even add this, so it is also accepting the title. Okay, so even our required property is actually working. Okay, so this is how you can add in the validation to any form inputs, and this is just a method that or a function I just created so that we can use the same function in for validating other pieces of input as well. Okay, so this is about the validation part, and also I want to clear all the inputs once I click on add to do. So for that you can just try this on your own by creating a private method like clear inputs, and then you can clear all the values. So I'll just go ahead and do that. So once we print the values to our console, we can call a method called this dot clear inputs. Okay, so let's create that method, which is going to be private, which means that it is only going to be called inside this particular class. And clear inputs, and here this is going to take this dot title input element and set the value of that to an empty string. And okay, so I'm just going to do the same for the other inputs as well. So this title or description input element, and going to set the value of that to empty string, and also the same for the R's. Alright, so once we do that, if I just now type in a title, description and number of R's, if I click on add to do, our inputs are cleared. Okay, so apart from just console logging the input values and displaying on the console, so I want to do even more. So let's take the next step. So let us create two sections to display the in progress to dos, and also a section for the finished to dos. Okay, so whenever we add a to do, it will add by default to the in progress to dos, and also we will be able to drag and drop. Okay, so we'll be accomplishing this step by step. So far we have only used this one template, which is actually responsible to get the input and just show it in the console, or just output the response with some proper validations. Okay, and now I want to use these other templates over here, which is actually responsible to create one single to do, and then later using this template we are going to render the other to dos within this template. Okay, so within this list. Okay, so I have created the template with an id to do list. So now I want to create another class which is only responsible to list out all the to dos we have. Okay, so this is the class which we were working on so far, which is only used to gather the to dos with some proper validations. Okay, so I just want to separate the logic in between these classes, and then later we will be refactoring this whole app.ts into its own files, so that we just don't have a complete mess of this. Okay, so we can just create another class right above this or anywhere within this file, since JavaScript will pass this file as just one file. And let's get started by creating a class called to do list. So let's define the constructor, and in this class we are also going to do the same thing as we did for the to do input, just by grabbing the input element and as well as the host element, and also what is the content inside this particular template. Okay, so this is the template which I want to get, and it has a section inside that which is responsible to list all the to dos. Okay, so let us grab by the id to do list, and so for that I can just copy some of the code that I have defined within the to do input, and I can just paste it over here. So I know there's a lot of code repetition, and later we will be refactoring this into its own classes, and then we will be extending from the base class as we keep defining it. Okay, so let us also copy from this constructor up till this point where we are grabbing the actual element from the template. Okay, and we can paste it in our constructor, and I just want to replace few things, and this is not going to have a class name of to do input, but we have defined that as to do list, right? So let us replace that with to do list, and this is not going to be a HTML form element, but since there is no such thing like HTML section element, just put in as normal HTML element, since we do not have a HTML section element. Okay, so let's replace this with that, and yeah, so now we have grabbed the template by the id to do list and also the element. So we are going to use the same template to render both our in progress and as well as the finished to dos. Okay, so for that we need a unique thing that distinguishes that. So whenever we are instantiating this to do list, we also need to pass in some additional information, such as the type of the list. Okay, either it's a in progress list or is it a finished list. Okay, so let us receive that from the constructor, and this time I can just use it directly by assigning a access modifier, that is the private, and then defining the variable over there itself. Okay, or the field. So this is going to be private type, and this is going to be either two values, whether it's in progress or it is finished. Okay, so I can just use a union type, and we can just say this is going to be in progress or it is going to be finished. Okay, so we can just put a dash here. Okay, so this means that we either any one of these two values we are going to define the type, and not any other value. Okay, so instead of like typing this dot type is equal to the type that we are receiving, so this will create automatically the type and add it to the field of this class. Okay, so I could have also done the same for this to do input, but I also wanted to show you this way. Okay, so since we are learning TypeScript, right? So once we do this, so we can instantiate two classes, so to do list, and pass in the first one is the finished and the second one is in progress. Okay, so since I also defined the types, so it is giving me suggestions over here, and also let's do the same for the finished. All right, so once that's done, now we can just move ahead and assign that ID of that. Okay, so since we need to distinguish between different elements within our DOM tree, so in progress or which is for finished, so we can receive that we already received that type for that, so we can just assign the ID just like we did for the to do input, like for the user input, which will apply the class of the user input. So we just want to also do the same for this dot element dot id, and we just want to do that for which type of to do. Okay, so we can just use a backtick for a dynamic string, and we can just say this dot type and then dash to do's. Okay, so by this we are inferring that this is going to be in progress or this is going to be finished to do's. Okay, so now I finally want to attach this template to the DOM, so by appending it inside this div with an ID of app. So what I can just do is I can just copy this line of code that we used over here, and we can just paste in right above this, and here we can, so we are grabbing this host element and then we are adding the adjacent element, so this is going to be before end. Okay, so last time actually I made a mistake, so this should be after start and not before end. Okay, so I just got confused in between these two templates, so this should be after begin. Okay, so now if I just save this file and go back to the browser, so you see that we are rendering two different templates. One is for the active to do's and one is for the finished to do's. Okay, so this is the class name which is actually distinguishing between these two elements by this ID that we are assigning. So if I just comment this out, and you see that this will no longer apply the particular class, so both are kind of blue. Okay, so this is what is the differentiating factor. So now we can just go ahead and show the title. Okay, so within our index.html we have this within this header tag we have an h2 tag, right? So there I just want to display some content, so I can just do that by grabbing the h2 element from the DOM. So I can just do this after we have inserted to the DOM, so we can access that by this dot element dot query selector. Okay, and query selector, and we can query select by the h2 tag, since we have only one h2 tag within our index.html, so we can just do it directly. And since I already am sure that this is always exist within my html file, so I have put an exclamation mark dot then we want the text content. Okay, so this is used to add a text content after in between the tags, and by putting an equal to we can just use this dot type, and then we can append the word to do's. Okay, so plus to do's, and once I save this, so based on the type it's going to add in the word to do's, so either in progress to do's or finished to do's. Okay, yeah, there we go. And also I need to separate them by a white space, and also it will be better if I capitalize these, so I can put this to uppercase like this, and also separate that with a white space. I can just do it like this, and once I save this, Yeah, that looks good. So I hope that's clear. So we have a class 2 which is responsible for adding a to do, and we have a class 2 which is responsible to displaying the to dos. Okay, so now we need to manage the state of our application, right? So apart from just console logging all these values, so we need to dynamically render these to dos inside our boxes, right? In our in progress to dos and finished to dos. So we need to have some sort of mechanism to manage the state. So whenever I click on add to do, so it will add the to do based on the state. So basically it will be an array. So we just need to store our particular to do along with the id inside that state and then render within our boxes. Okay, so the basic approach to achieve this is what we would do is within our to do input class we can probably create a state by initializing, like, let's say to dos, and set that equal to an empty array, and using this variable we can just go ahead whenever we click on the submit button, it should go ahead and push the particular like, let's say to dos dot push, and then we pass in the particular values of the title, description and the hours. Okay, so based on the state we can just pass into this particular to-do list and then render over there. Okay, so we could of course do this, but I just want to create a global state management. Okay, you would have heard of global state management libraries like Redux and all that, okay, which will manage the state of your application. So I also want to use that approach by creating another class which will manage the state of our to-dos. Okay, and this class will be a singleton class, which means that we can only create a single instance of the class, which means that every particular file that we are creating within this will have only one single instance of that particular state, which is basically an array, and whenever we create another instance of that, it will still use the same instance. Okay, so it will still return us the same instance, so that we don't create multiple states. Okay, so this is how we used to use it in like Redux if you are working with React and all that. Okay, so in that state, whenever we click on the submit button to add the to do, it will add the to do into the state, and also we want to subscribe to that state, which means that we are going to add in certain listeners to our project input or the project list state class. So whenever a to do is added, we listen to that change within the state, and then it will update the list within our to do list. Okay, so this is the basically the similar to the PubSub model, if you would have heard of that. So basically we are publishing an event, and based on the other classes where we are adding the listeners, so basically we are subscribing to that publisher, and then we update the state of that. So once it listens, like the function basically will be called, and then it will update the to dos. Okay, so either if we are removing a to do or also adding a to do. Okay, so let us go ahead and start building that class. So we can now go on top of this class and create that. So that is, let's call this to do state, which sounds like a sensible name. So we need to create a private property called to dos. Okay, and this is initially going to be an empty array. All right, so now within this to dos, so for now we can just temporarily assign this type to be as an array of anything. Okay, and this is not permanent, but later we are just going to fix this. Okay, so just for the sake, we need to now focus on building this to do state. So as I told you, this is going to be a singleton class, and we just need to create just one instance of that. Okay, so for that I'm going to add another field called private, and this is going to be a static method. So we are just going to use the static method to call this particular field over here. So that is instance, and set this to the type of the to do state, basically the same name as the class. So to do state, basically the instance will be of the same name of the class, right? So, and also let us now create the method, so that is going to be of static. So we can call this get instance, and this is going to check if we already have an instance of our to do state, then we return that same instance. If we do not have an instance, then we create a new instance and return that instance. Okay, so let's check if this dot instance exists. Okay, so this we are referring to this static field over here called instance, and if that exists, then we just want to return that. Okay, so if that doesn't exist, then we want to create a new instance. So we can set the value of this dot instance to the by creating a new instantiation of this class. So new to do state, and then we want to return this. Okay, so return this dot instance. Alright, so once that's done, this is our singleton class. So I can now create a instance here saying to do state, and then we can call the to do state dot get instance. Okay, so since this doesn't have a constructor, we cannot use a new keyword, so we can just use a static method, that is to get the instance. So this will return us the instance. Okay, so if I try to create another state like to do state 2, okay, so this will return us the same instance. Okay, so since this instance is already created, it will return us the instance itself, which is of the same type of the class. And again, whenever we try to update this variable, it is referring to the same instance. Okay, when either I update this or this. Okay, so that is use of singleton classes. So now I can create a method to add a to do to our state, so which will push to this to do's array. Okay, so this is going to be a public method called add to do. Okay, and so this is going to receive the title, which is of type string, and then the description also of type string, and the number of hours, or we can just call this hours, and which is now going to be a type number. Okay, so inside this method we are going to create a to do object and then push into this array. Okay, so to create that object, we can call this new to do and set this equal to, we can now have a id which will distinguish between the other to dos. Okay, so for now we can just we can of course use many libraries like uuid and then assign that. So just to keep it simple, I can just use a math library and call the random function over here to generate a random value and convert that to a string. Okay, to string. Okay, so of course this will not, sometimes it's very rare that this will be the duplicate one. So just for the sake of testing, we are using this. So in reality you might not use this approach. Okay, so let us now use a title and set that to the title that we are receiving, and also the same for the description and for the hours. Okay, so after doing this dot to do's dot push the new to do. Okay, so once that's done, we can now go to the submit handler, and instead of just console logging, I can just call the to do state. So the instance that I created dot add to do, and then we want to pass in the title, the description, and also the hours. Okay, and yeah, so this will add the to do to our state. So once this is done, now I need to forward this to do's, which is an array, to our this class. Okay, so this is the to do list class, so which is responsible to render all the to do's, right? So again, as I told you, we are going to create a like a pub sub model, like we are going to attach a listener to this to do list, which will listen for any to do that is added. Okay, so to create that listener, so we can just create an array of that. So whenever we have multiple classes, we can also add in listeners over there and then push them into this array. Okay, so we will have a list of listeners, and whenever we add a to do, we call all those listeners by passing in the actual to do. Okay, so let us create another private field called listeners, and which is going to be again of type any. Later we are going to fix this. Okay, so this is just for temporary. So this is going to be an empty array. All right, and now we can go ahead and create a method called add listener. Okay, so we just need to call this particular method when whichever class needs to subscribe to this particular state, and then we attach a listener to it. Okay, so this is going to take in the listener. Okay, so by the way, these are going to be functions which we are going to call. So we can call this listener function. Okay, which is going to be of type function for now. Later we are just going to change it, and we just need to push the particular listeners to this particular array that we just created over here. Okay, so this dot listeners dot push, and then pass in the listener function. Okay, so at the end of the day, these are just an array of functions which we just need to call whenever we add a to do. Okay, so let us loop across all the listeners. So for const listener of listeners, sorry, this dot listeners, okay, and we can call this listener function, okay, just to make it clear that this is a function. And inside this we can just call the listener function, and we just need to pass in this to-dos, okay. And remember, this to-dos is going to be an array, so we just don't want to pass in the original array, okay, so that later if we modify this original array, so even this array would get modified, right? So we just want to send a copy of that, okay. So how do we send a copy? We can use a spread operator and passing the this dot to-dos, okay, and we are using an array, so this will create a copy of that. And so let's go to the to-do list, which is actually responsible to list all the to-dos. So for that we can call the to-do state dot add listener right here before we are rendering the to-dos. So to-do state dot add listener, and then we receive the list of to-dos, okay. Again, let's set the type of that to any, and here we can and before this we can create a variable here called this dot let's say added to-dos, okay, and set that to an empty array, and then we just want to push that to this array, okay. So we are just creating a local state here, and then we just push it inside that, okay. So let us go to the body of this function and like this. So we say this dot added to-dos and set that equal to the to-dos that we are receiving. All right, and also let us add in the field here added to-dos and set this to, for now, just any, okay. So now we have got all the to-dos, so now it's the time to render all the to-dos within the box, okay. So we can create a method here called render to-dos, which is going to be a private method, render to-dos, inside the body of the function. So we need to now distinguish between these two to-dos, right? So where we want to render the to-dos, so either in progress to-dos or finished to-dos, so which is also both going to be in the form of array, but we do not have any ID to differentiate that, okay. So in one of those videos we had just did a query select on the h2 tag, and then we are displaying the title, right? So if we go to our index.html, we have an unordered list, so which is also a template, and we are creating two instances of that, okay. So one is for the in progress and one is for the finished, okay. So we do not we need to uniquely identify it for which unordered list is for the in progress and which is for the finished to-dos, okay. So for that we can just add in the ID over here. So we can do that by, where's that? So we can create a ID for the list, so we can call this list ID and set this equal to give it a unique ID based on the type that is passed in within our constructor. So we can use backticks, and here, so inside this we say this dot type and then the value that is to-dos list, okay. So either it is in progress to-do list or finished to-do list, okay. So now we just add the ID to our UL element, so we can just grab that from this dot element dot query selector. So we query select on the UL tag, and then we add a ID property on it, which is going to be list ID, okay. And okay, so we can just add a exclamation here mark here just to inform TypeScript that this always exists. And yeah, so now we have added the ID based on the type. So now we can get that unordered list within this render to-dos. So we can just call that list element, okay, either the in progress or finished list. So, and which is going to be we can just grab that by document.getElement by ID, okay. So based on this ID, okay, whichever is passed in, either in progress or finished, okay. So again we can use the template literal and say this dot type and then the to-do list, okay. So make sure there's no typo here, okay. And now we can loop across all the added to-dos, and then we can create a list element and then append the text content inside that, okay. So let us create a for loop, and for const, let's call this to-do item of this dot added to-dos, all right. And inside this we are just going to create a list item, let's call this list item. So let's create that list item from document.createElement. So that is going to be an element of the li tag, and now we just want to append the text content. So the basically the list item dot text content, and then we want to set that to the title of that, so to do item dot title. Okay, and then we just want to push that to the list element. Okay, so list element dot append child. So this is an unordered list, right? So we can just pass in the li, so which is the list order. So we can say append child and then pass in the list item. So let me just make it clear. So we are grabbing the unordered list based on which type of the list that we are rendering. So that is either in progress or finished, and then we loop across all the to do items, and then we create a list item. Okay, and then we append the text content of that, so to whatever the title that is passed in within our to do item, and then we append that list item with the particular title to the unordered list. Okay, so that's what this rendered to dos function is doing. So now let's go ahead and call this rendered to dos within our add listener. So this dot render to dos. So if I save this and go back to my application, so if I just add in now title and then some description and hours to complete and click on add to do, yeah, there we go. So we are now able to add the to do with just the title. Okay, so we'll also be adding the description and the hours as well. We haven't specified where to render these to dos initially, so we just want to render this inside the in progress, which we haven't done yet, so we'll be doing also after that. And now if I just add in another to do, also the number of hours, so that works. Okay, however, there's a bug over here. Okay, you see that this thing is being duplicated 2 times. So whatever the state we had before, so we just want to replace that. Okay, so it's just adding to that. Okay, so which we do not want. So let us fix this up. So let us tackle this problem step by step. So the first step I want to take is to replace this type that I have assigned to to-dos, which for temporarily I have assigned to any. So I want to use a custom type, okay, which will be of the type to do, so that whenever we are adding a to do, so I want to create a custom object type of this to do, which will contain the id, title, description and hours whenever we are creating a new to do. Okay, and we just need to assign the type for that, so that TypeScript can help us with the variable names, and just not by memorizing whatever we can call this, like description or desk or something like that. Okay, so that TypeScript can help us with the variable names. Okay, so I'm going to create a class called to do and then assign it whenever we are creating a to do. Okay, so for that I'm using a class. You could of course use a type or an interface. So I also want to create an instance of that to do, so that's why I'm going to create a class. We can go right above the class for the state of the to do. We can call this class as just maybe to do, because this will be the type. Okay, and inside this I just want to initialize the constructor. Okay, so and this constructor is going to receive few parameters. Okay, so that is the object values, the properties that are required to create a new to do. Okay, so I'm going to use a shortcut which where the arguments that are passed in while creating an instance of this class, so that will automatically also create a field for this class. Okay, by defining the type for that. Okay, so we can use a access modifier like public or private. So by saying public, so the first thing is the id, which is by default going to be of type string. Okay, so by using the access modifier I can by automatically set a field for the class. Okay, I can also duplicate this few more times for the rest of the properties. Okay, so the next one is going to be the title, and then the description, and finally the number of hours, right? So we can just call this hours. Okay, so I also want to introduce another property to hold the status of the to do. Okay, so either it is going to be active or in progress, or it is finished. Okay, so for that I can just add in another field over here, that is for status, and I'm not going to use the union type just as we did over here, like somewhere here, right, like for type in progress and finished, but I want to introduce another type which is supported in TypeScript, that is enum. Okay, so I can just put this as status, and this is going to be of enum type. Okay, so we can just define that right at the top by saying enum and then give the name of that. Okay, so we can call that to do status. okay, and this is going to receive those values that are supported for this status. Okay, so we can just call this in progress and then finished. Okay, only these two values are allowed for creating this to do. Okay, and then finally we can assign this to this to do status. Okay, so if I just hover on this, it will say that this is going to be of type to do status, and which is a enum type. Okay, and these are the only two values that are supported. If you try to add a different value, TypeScript is going to throw an error at us. Okay, so now let us assign this to do. So let us go to the place where we are creating a new to do, and here we can just replace all of this by creating an instance of that to do. Okay, so I have just cut that and can call new to do. Okay, and then pass in these values. So we don't need this. Okay, so just by passing the id, title, description and hours. Okay, so you see that TypeScript is giving me an error saying that it expects 5 arguments but got 4. Okay, so since we have already added another enum type, that is status. Okay, so by default, whenever we are creating a new to do, it is always going to be in inactive state, right? So by default we can just put here directly to the active. Okay, so now we can call that enum type, that is to do status, and sorry, this should be to do status, and call the in progress. Okay, so you see that TypeScript also gives us suggestions, and so this is basically number. By mistake I gave it as a string. Alright, so this is how TypeScript helps us, right? So if it finds any type that is not matching, it will give us an error, and this saves us from any types of potential bugs we encounter within our application. So this is done, and now let's go ahead and replace wherever we have assigned any to the actual type that we have defined. So let us replace this with an to do, okay, with an array of to do's, okay, and also we'll come back to listeners. So let's go ahead and replace wherever we have used any. So let me just do a search. Okay, and here we have the added to do, so we can replace this with to do, and also over here. All right, and anywhere else. Okay, so apart from the auto bind and listeners. Okay, so we have replaced all the any with to do. Okay, the type, the class that we have defined here. So now let us do the same for the listeners as well. So this time I'm going to use the type and call this listener, and this is going to receive an argument where the type of that is going to be this to do. Okay, an array of to do's. Okay, and basically it's a function, right? So we just need to write this within a function, and this returns void. Okay, so this doesn't return anything, but it is just going to receive the item of to do's, right? So we can just set this to items, and we just need to assign the type of that, so that is to do, and which is going to be an array of that. Okay, so now we can just go ahead and replace this any with the listener type. All right, and we cannot use an interface here because interface is just supports for objects and not for functions. Okay, so you see that it gives us an error over here. So for such type of functions we always go with type. Okay, so now we can go ahead and replace this where we have just defined a function to just the listener that we just created, the type of that. All right, and yeah, so now we have fixed the types. So now if I just add in a title, a description and number of hours, so this should still work the same. Okay, so however we haven't solved the problem where this duplicacy is there. So we are just displaying the title on both the sides. Okay, even on in progress and as well as finished to do. So since we haven't defined the status of this to do, so either it is in progress or finished. So if we define that, this is only going to show in this in progress to do's and not on finished to do's. So within the add listener function, we are just passing in the to do's irrespective of whether the type is in progress or finished. Okay, so we just want to filter that out. So we can just create another variable called let's say relevant to do's, and set this equal to the to do's that we are receiving, and we just need to filter that based on the type, right? So we can just say to do, and for each to do we just want to check the type that we are receiving while creating an instance of this class. Okay, so we pass in the type, right? So we check if the this dot type, if that is equal to in progress. Okay, and so we just need to return the true or false value if the to do status is matching the enum type, that is whether it is in progress or not. Okay, so we just return todo.status, and if that is equal to the todo status, the enum type dot in progress. Okay, so only if this is in progress we return true, else we return false. Okay, and if that is false, then we finally return the todo status, and if that is matching the todo status dot finished. All right, and then instead of using this todos directly, we can just use the relevant todos. Okay, so now if I save this and go back, so now I add a title, a description, and number of hours. You see that it has only been filtered to in progress todos. Okay, however, we haven't implemented the feature where we can just drag and drop to the finished todos. Okay, so we'll be doing that later. So for now we are just displaying the title over here and not any other values like the description and the hours to complete. Okay, so also let's do that. And also we haven't still solved the problem of that duplicacy between the to-dos, right? So if I just add in another to-do, and you see that it has been appending from the previous value. Okay, so it's been duplicating those many times. Okay, so we just need to tackle that. So if I go back to my code where I so basically here where we are rendering our to-dos, so we are just appending the new list item to the list element. Okay, so we just need to probably clear the list element and then add in the new list. Okay, so whatever the list was there previously, it was also creating a new item and also adding those two items which are previously existing to the list element. Okay, so this is like keeping on duplicating. So what I can just do for this to solve is we can just clear the list element. Okay, so we can before we loop across all the to-dos, we need to clear that. So list element dot inner HTML and set that equal to an empty string. Okay, so of course this is not the ideal way of doing this since we are playing with the DOM again and again, so which will create multiple renders whenever we change something. So whatever the to-dos we had previously, still it deletes that and adds that again. Okay, so this is not performant, but just for the sake of this project I am just using this, and this course is not about learning all those, but learning just TypeScript, right? So that's why. Okay, so we are getting an error here since we haven't defined the type for this. So let's set this to HTML unordered list. So that is unordered list element. So the optional chaining was not necessary. So now if I just go back and try this again, okay, I add the to-do and create another to-do, and yeah, so we have cleared the previous state and then we are just adding a new to-do to the existing to-dos. Okay, so we are not duplicating values again. So now I want to create each method for whatever it's doing over here. Okay, so this is like to adding the listener, and this is to host the element to the DOM, and this one is to list all the to-dos. Okay, so it would always be a good idea to create its own function to whatever it does, just as we did for the render to-dos. Okay, so this is going to render all the to-dos, so we just want to do the same for this. Okay, because this constructor function is becoming a very large object, and we just want to convert that to its own methods, and then we can just call that method inside this. Okay, so let us cut this inside our clipboard, and we can just create another method which is going to be private, and then we can call this maybe configure, and we can just paste in our content over there, and then we can just call this dot configure like this. Okay, so that we do not have a very long constructor function, and let's do the same for this as well, where we are attaching this element to the DOM tree. Maybe we can just call this attach, so which is also going to be a private method, and then call this dot attach like this. And also we can create another method for this. Let's say this dot render content. Okay, and then create the private method for that. All right, So by this we have separated its logic to its own methods, all right, which is being private, which means that it can only be called inside this class. Okay, let's do the same for this class as well for the to do input. Okay, so we can just cut this and call this dot attach, all right, and create that method over here, so which is going to be private attach. Okay, and also we can put this inside the configure method just as we did for the previous class. Okay, so we can create another private, this let's call it configure, and then paste in here, and we can just get rid of this. And also we can put this event listener inside this configure method, and finally call this dot configure. Okay, so we have now separated again for this class into its own logic, so basically into its own methods. So now our code is looking much more better. However, we are doing a lot of duplicacy between classes. Okay, so you see that these three elements are also being repeated within the to do input as well. Okay, so it would also be a good idea where we create a base class and then extend from that class. Okay, so if you know about object oriented programming and any programming language for that matter, so we can create a base class, and then these three elements we can just extend from that and then call the super method on the parent constructor to inherit all these basically the fields. Okay, so basically we are reusing the code, okay, from the base class. Okay, and this process is called as inheritance. So let us create that class. So let's now create that base class. I'm going to call this component. Okay, so this is similar to the component that we used to use in React components. Okay, if you have used React or even Angular, so we extend our component from the React component, right? So this is somewhat similar to that which we are building, and within this class we are going to receive these three fields with the template element, the host element, and the actual element itself, which we are going to render within the DOM. Okay, so this class should only be inherited and should not be directly instantiated from this component. Okay, so we cannot call like new component like this. So basically we want to extend this class, the existing class, with this component. Okay, so for that we can mark this class as an abstract class. Okay, so we have the abstract keyword saying that this class can only be used for inheritance and not for direct instantiation. Okay, so if we just create a new component like this, so TypeScript is going to throw an error saying that this is cannot create a instance of an abstract class. Okay, so that's why we are marking this as an abstract class. So we are setting the type of this template element to HTML template element, so that is of course fixed, and but we do not know that the host element will always be a div element or the element will always be a HTML element. Okay, so we do not know what kind of type will be passed in by extending this component. So to tackle this problem, we have something in TypeScript called as generics. Okay, so whenever we are creating an instance of this class, we just need to pass in the type of that, what exactly will be the type of this host element and the actual element. Okay, that will be rendered to the DOM. So what I can just do is, you can use angle brackets like this and then pass in the types. Okay, so the two types for the host element and the element. So I can just mark this T, which stands for type, and then U. Okay, and this will extend the HTML element. Okay, so basically which means that we are extending the base HTML element. Okay, so which means that this will always be a HTML element, but we do not know what will be the actual HTML element. Okay, so it can be a div element, it can be a unordered list element, so anything like that. Okay, so we can set this to HTML element, and the same as here as well. Okay, so we are extending the type of that. All right, and instead of hard coding the type here to HTML div element, we can just refer this to the type T that we are receiving here, and also here. Okay, this is of type U. Okay, so now we can go ahead and define our constructor, and within this constructor is going to take in a few parameters. Okay, so what are all required for the class to extend? So one is the template element. Okay, so we just need to pass in the ID, and the second one is the host element. Okay, so that is by the ID app. Okay, so these are all going to be dynamic, so we can pass in when we are extending the base class, that is the component. And apart from this, what else do we need? We also need the ID. Okay, so that we need to attach to the element, and also the before end or after, starting after, or after start, something like that. So we can just pass these four parameters to this constructor function. So we can just call this template ID, and this is going to be of type string, and then we have the host element. Okay, again this is going to be of type string. Then we have the where do we want the host element to be inserted, like after start or before end. So we can put this as a boolean value to just set insert at start or not. Okay, and this is going to be a boolean. And then we have the element id, so I can call this new element id. Okay, and this is going to be of type string again, so this id. Okay, and we have, these are all the things that are required to extend this class, and this id is completely optional. Okay, so if you want to attach an id to the element, we can do that, otherwise not. Okay, so for that we can put a question mark over here saying that this is optional field, and make sure that all the other fields are defined right before this optional things. Okay, so inside this constructor function we can now grab these values that we are defining within the to do list. Okay, and till here, so I'm just going to cut this and paste in over here. Okay, and we just need to replace this with the template id. Okay, and then the host element, so this is going to be the host element, and so this is the id basically, so we can just specify this as id. Okay, so host element id. Alright, and it's giving us an error here, so type html div element is not assignable to type d, so we can just replace this to the actual type that we are receiving over here. So we don't need this added to do, so this is just the class specific, so we can just put this back here, and this is going to be of type u. Okay, so the type that we have defined as the element, and this needs to be the element id, the new element id. So this is completely optional, right? So we need to put a check over here. So if the new element id is defined, if new element id, then we just need to do this. Alright, so if new element id exists, then we are going to paste in here. So if new element id exists, then we are going to do this. Okay, so this we cannot assign the type just like this, so we can replace this with the new element id. Okay, so once that's done, now we can define the attach method that we have defined in our classes over here. So this attach over here, so we can just cut this and put in over here. Okay, right after the constructor, and here we can just call this dot attach like this, and here we just need to pass in the variable here called insert or start or not. So we just need to check this over here before we hard code this value. So let's first pass in the insert at start, and here let's receive that. Okay, and let's check if this exists, then we are going to say after begin, else that is before end. Alright, and this is going to be of type boolean. And also let us define two more methods for the configure and the render content. Okay, so we have defined somewhere here, so this is to configure and this is to render the content. Okay, so we can just provide that here as a method, so we can set this to configure, and this is going to just do something but not going to return anything. Okay, so it returns void, and this is going to be an abstract method. Okay, so what do I mean by marking a method as abstract? Which means that when I instantiate this, when I extend this particular component with another class, so this is the property or this is the method which I have to definitely call. Okay, so if we don't want to do that, we can mark this optional, like putting a question mark right here and then adding the return type. Okay, so let's also define the render content. Okay, so you can call this render content. Okay, and these properties like need not have to be optional, so we'll be using these two abstract methods to whenever we extend this base component. Okay, and by the way, you cannot add in a private or a public access modifier for abstract methods. Okay, so that will give us an error. So by default it is going to be public, and whenever you extend this component you'll have to define these methods. Okay, if not, TypeScript would yell at us. So now let us go ahead and use this particular component class that we created as an abstract class and to extend this to-do list. Okay, so for now I can just get rid of this since we have already defined that within our base class. So we can just use the extends keywords. So extends component. Okay, so this is nothing specific to TypeScript. This is a plain JavaScript, just as how we extend a existing class. So extends. Alright, and now we just need to define the generic type for this. So the type for the host element and the actual element, so we can give that as a HTML div element. So HTML div element for the host element, and then for the element itself, so this will just be a HTML element. So to call the constructor method of the parent element, so by passing in these values, so we use the super keyword inside the constructor of the extended class. Okay, so let's call super, and then we pass in these four arguments to this constructor function, that is a template ID. So the template ID is called as to do list. Okay, so this pertains to this ID that we are rendering all the to-dos in the form of a list, and then the second argument is the host element, so that is app. Okay, and then we want to either insert at the beginning or at the end. So if you want to insert at the beginning, so it is going to be the value of true. Okay, so here, where are we using that? It's here. So insert as start, so we want to insert at the end, so that's why we can use false. And then the last one is for the ID. Okay, for the element that we define an ID, right? So we can use backticks and then say this dot type. Okay, so this keyword cannot be accessed before the super method is being executed, so we can just say type and then dash todos. All right, and then we can get rid of this this dot attach, which is already defined within our base class, and still we have some errors. So let's get rid of this private for both the methods, since we are extending the method from the base class, which is actually an abstract. So we don't have any errors now. So we have extended the base component class, okay, for the to-do list. So let's do the same for the to-do input as well. So I'm going to get rid of these three properties which are already defined in the base class. So I'll extend the component class. Okay, and we just need to pass in the generic types for this. So that is HTML div element for the host element. Okay, and for the element itself, so that is responsible to render the form, so that is going to be a form element, right? So we have already defined over here as well, so that is HTML form element. All right, so once that's done, we can now call the super method to call the constructor of the parent class. So the ID, we just need to pass that as to do input, since that's what we have defined over here within our index.html. so to do input, and then we want to pass in the host element, so that is app, and then we want to either start from the beginning or true or no, so that is yes. So we want to render this form at the beginning, and then we set the ID of that. Okay, so that is user input. Okay, so that's what I guess we have defined over here. So this user input. Okay, so we are going to get rid of all of this in a moment. So let's say user input. All right, so once that's done, we can get rid of these which are already defined within our base class. Okay, and also this attach and this. Okay, and we just need to remove the access modifier for this configure method, which is already an abstract method within our parent class. So we don't need this as well, since this has all been handled within our base class. Okay, so we have the get user input, which is specific for this class, and yeah, that's it. And still TypeScript is giving me some error. So since we have specified an abstract method called render content within our base class, okay, so we have to define this particular method. You see that TypeScript is not happy with that. So what we can just do is we can just call the render method, so okay, and then do nothing. Okay, so with this we have extended the to do input with our base class, that is component. So everything should now work as same as before. Okay, so now we have just organized our code much more better. Okay, so let's now check if everything works same as before. Okay, so adding another title, description, number of hours to complete. Okay, so that works good. So if I just type in some invalid description and hours, so which is less than maybe 5 characters, so it gives us that error as well. And if I just leave a form empty, an error. Okay, so everything is working as expected. So we have learned how to use the abstract class, okay, and also how we can extend the base class by using the property within object oriented programming, that is inheritance, and how we can play around with TypeScript generics and playing around with types. Okay, so I also want to create a base class for this to do state and then extend from that base class. Okay, so that we create a very generic state management and then we extend. So for now we just have to do, later we might also have users as well, so we need to also manage the user state, so we can just extend from that base class as well and not just specific to this particular class. Okay, so let us create a class by the name state, okay, which seems meaningful. So let us define this listeners within our base class, and then we also push this add listener method to our base class as well. Okay, so this is basically a class which will have the method called add listener, and we just need to attach listeners to those methods or functions that need to have, that require the state. Okay, so with that done, we can now extend the base class, that is the state itself. For this type of listener, instead of just hard coding this to the to do type, we can just use the TypeScript generics to just mark this as t, which means that this is a generic class, and we can just assign that over here as a generic term, that is t or the type. Okay, and now we can use this type over here that has been passed in. So first receive that from the class and then assign this to the types of this. Okay, so this generic term t. So far we are just working on the to do, right? So this particular class which we were assigned the type for this. So now we have just made this generic, and now we just need to pass in the type of to do, okay, within our base class like this. So we just need to get rid of this which is already defined in our base class, and also this method which is already defined over here. Probably I should have cut pasted, I have just copy pasted. Okay, so we have one more place where we have, so we have a problem here. It says that property listeners is private and can only be accessible within this particular base class. Okay, so since I have just marked this as private, and this listeners can only be accessed only within this class and not by the child class. Okay, so if you want to also make it accessible to the child classes as well and not from anywhere outside that, so we, instead of private, we have another access modifier called protected. Okay, so which means that any class that is extending this particular class can have access to this property. Okay, so but not when we create an instance of that. Okay, so now if I try to test my application. Okay, so does this work? Yes, and once more. All right, so that works, and yeah, so everything works well. So only thing is now we have organized our code much more better and in a cleaner way, okay, by using inheritance, which is in object oriented programming. Okay, so and also we have incorporated TypeScript inside that. Okay, so I hope you're enjoying so far and how to use TypeScript in any situation you might face. Okay, so still we have not yet completed, so let's now move ahead. So now I want to display the extra information about this to do, like the description and the number of hours to complete. So for now we are just displaying the title, so we can go ahead now and display even the description and the number of hours to complete. So within the render to do's method, so we are just creating manually with a document.create element with the list item, and then we are just appending the title to the text content, and then we are appending it to the list element. Okay, so there is nothing wrong in this. So since we are using object oriented approach to list all the to do's, so we can also create another class to for a single to do. Okay, so if you have a look at the index.html, so we have another template to display the single to do. Okay, so we can just grab that by this id single to do, and then whenever we want to create a to do, we can create an instance of that new to do, and then we can just display that, okay, inside this for loop. So let us go ahead and create that class. So let's call this to do item. Okay, and of course this is going to extend the base component that we just created. Okay, so the extends the component. So let's define the constructor method, and inside this constructor we are going to call the super method, which is going to call the constructor of the parent element. Alright, so inside this constructor we are going to receive the host id. Okay, so this host id is basically where do we want to render the to do. So basically we have this index.html, we have the ul tag over here, and inside this we want to list all of our to dos, right? So based on this template which has the li tag, so that is the id that we will be passing it. Okay, so since I made this generic, we need to pass the id of that unordered list. Okay, so also it represents where do we want to render, either it is on the on progress side or on the finished to do side. Okay, so that is why we are going to require this, because we have already defined the id for that. It's somewhere around here. So basically it's this id. Okay, and that's what we need to pass in over here, and then we receive the to do itself. Okay, which is responsible to list this particular to do item. Okay, and for the super we just need to pass in the first is the template id, so which is by the name single to do, just as we have defined here. Alright, and then we want to also pass in the host id that we are receiving as arguments for this constructor. So host id, and then we want to either mention we want to add the to do at the start or at the end, because that's what we have defined over here, right, within the constructor of this base class. Okay, so the insert at start and the new element id. So for this we can set this to false, which means that the to do will be entered at the last. So let's specify false. Okay, so if you want to add it at the start, you can also set that to true, and then finally we need the id. Okay, so for the new element id that we are going to set for the unordered list, so that is to do.id. Okay, and let's assign the type for that. So this to do is of course going to be of the type to do that we have created the class for. Okay, so this right here. All right, and then we also need to provide the type for this, that is of type string. All right, so this should be to do.id. Also we need to specify the types that will be required for our base component. Okay, so here that is the type for the host element and the element itself. Okay, and so for that, for a host element is going to be this unordered list, right? So we need to specify the type of that to be an unordered list, and also for the element itself that we are going to render, so that is the html li tag, right? So let's specify those two types over here. So the first one is going to be the html unordered list element, and then the li element. Okay, like this. And yeah, so this to do item of course is going to require those two compulsory methods that we need to define, that is configure and render content. So I can just call them right within the constructor, called this dot configure and then this dot render content. Okay, so let's define those two methods over here. So this dot configure, we are going to come back to this later. Okay, for the implementation of the drag and drop. Okay, so sorry, this should be just configure. All right, and another one is the render content. So as soon as I enter, TypeScript automatically assign the type, since we already done that for the base class. Okay, so TypeScript also helps us in that regard. So inside the render content, we are going to query select on the different tags that we have inside our list. So that is on the h2, h3 and the paragraph tag, and then we are going to render content inside that. Okay, so let's go inside this and we can grab that from this dot element. So this is the element that we are specifying this to be the list element. Okay, so that's what we are grabbing that. So from the element where we are specifying the id as the single to do. Okay, so this concrete element, and then we can do a query select on the h2 tag. Okay, and then we are going to set the text content of that to the this dot to do dot title. Okay, and let's specify the access modifier for this to do. Okay, I told you the shortcut, right, which will also add this as a field. So public, and this we know for certainty that this h2 tag always exists within our index.html, so we can safely put an exclamation mark there. So yeah, and also let's duplicate this to also display the number of hours and also the description of the to do. Okay, so let's duplicate this few more times, and so let's change this to the h3 tag, and instead of saying this dot to do, we can say this dot to do dot hours, and then pass in a string of to complete. Okay, so it says that the number of hours that is passed in, that is 1 2 3, so that many hours to complete. All right, so let's finally do for the description and change this to a paragraph tag. Alright, so now we can go to the for loop where we are looping across all the list items using the li tag, okay, where we are creating the element. So there is nothing wrong in doing this, but just to use the object oriented approach to render all the to dos, so we are also using this, and also later it will be helpful when you are using the drag and drop feature. Okay, so that's why I'm also creating this class. So instead of this, we can just replace this by creating a new to do item, and then we just need to pass in the two arguments for the constructor function. So that is the host id and the to do itself. Okay, so let's specify the host id. So we can grab the element of that unordered list from this dot element. Okay, so this time it's not called this dot element dot id, but you see that the element itself is referring to the to do list. Okay, so that's the template id that I specified over here. So that means that this section tag is the element. Okay, so we want to query select on the ul tag. So what we can just do is we can just specify dot query selector and then specify the ul tag and then get the id of that. Okay, so we have, remember, we already assigned the id over here by getting the list id and then adding the id property to it and assigning to the list id whichever the type which is being passed in over here. So either it is in progress or it is finished, and then we pass in the to do item itself like this. And yeah, so we know for certainty that this exists, and yeah, so now we can go ahead and test this out. So now if I type in a title, description and the number of hours and click on add to do, so there we go. So we get the title, then the number of hours to complete and the description. Okay, however, you see that there's a problem in the number of hours. Okay, so it says 3 to complete, so maybe I should say 3 hours to complete. So let's go right here and add hours to this, and also let's give a space over here. So now if I save this and go back, I should just try this again, and yeah, so it says 3 hours to complete. But now if I just add in another title and also give it a description, but if I just type in 1 hour to complete, but it still says 1 hours to complete, so it should be singular, so it should say 1 hour to complete. So for this we can do a simple trick to counter this problem. Okay, so instead of just making the check here itself, like adding the logic, so we can add a get method inside this class, so we can just call that get method and pass in the hours. Okay, so we check that if that number of hours is 1 or greater than 1, and then show the singular or plural form of this hours. Okay, so let's create the getter here. So we can specify the get right before the method name called let's call this hours. Okay, and it's usually a convention that we specify any getters and setters right before the constructor. Okay, so it's not a must, so it's always a convention. Okay, so now we just access the this dot to do dot hours and check if that is equal to 1. Okay, so let's put this inside an if, and if that is true, then we return with a string of, let's say, 1 hour. Okay, and if that is not equal to 1, then we can say that many hours. Okay, so we can use a template string and say this dot to do dot hours and add in the hours to the string. Okay, like this. And once I save this, so now I can go right here and replace this dot to do dot hours to just this dot hours without executing this, just like a function. Okay, so getters should not be executed, so this is just this dot hours. Okay, so that represents the getter method that we have defined within this class, and also we can just get rid of this hours. Okay, and make sure you give it a white space. Okay, either you do it here or here, so it doesn't matter. So now if I save this and try to test this once again, so I add in a title, a description and number of hours. So you see that we get 3 hours to complete, but if I just type in another to do with just 1 hour, and I get 1 hour to complete. Okay, so that's working fine. So this is nothing TypeScript specific, so getters and setters are also compatible with normal JavaScript, so this is nothing new to TypeScript. Okay, so just wanted to show you this feature where you can do some sort of calculations for checking something inside this get method, okay, instead of just doing it inside this. Okay, so this is a cleaner way of doing it. So there is just one feature that is missing within our Todo app is the drag and drop feature. All right, so a user should be able to drag and drop from in progress to-dos to the finished to-dos. Okay, and not just to drag and drop, we also need to update the state of the to-dos. Okay, so remember we also had a status of the to-do. So if the to-do is completed or if it is finished, okay, so we have also created that enum type, right? So we also need to update that, and we also need to handle with drag events, okay, within a particular block. So basically this is a HTML element, right? So we just need to handle that using drag events, and then we just need to check if this is a valid droppable area and all of that complex stuff. Okay, so let's go ahead and start building this. So we have this class for the to-do item which is responsible to render a single to-do. So to this class we just need to handle the drag events. Okay, so when we drag, that will emit an event, and that event will basically call a function, and that will do the behind the scenes work. Okay, so that has to update the state and all of that. Okay, so for this we just need to create interface which will manage the drag and drop. Okay, basically those are functions. So basically creating methods inside a class that will handle the drag and drop feature. Okay, so for that let us go right to the top and create another interface. So now we need to create two interfaces for two classes, basically for the class that we have for the to-do item, right? So for that we need to check if that is a draggable item or not. Okay, so we have two events for that. One is the drag start and one is the drag end. Okay, so when we drag something, so this is the drag start position, and drag end is the position where we are leaving the cursor. Okay, so that we just need to create an interface for. So let's create this. And by the way, interfaces are not just to define the type of what an object should look like, but also it can sign a contract for a particular class. Okay, and then we can use the implements keyword and then pass in the particular interface over there. Okay, so which means that these are the two functions or methods that needs to be defined within the class. All right, so let's I'll just show you how that actually work. So let's create an interface called let's say draggable. Okay, and this is going to hold two particular methods. One is the drag start handler and one is the drag end handler. Okay, so this drag start is the event that will be emitted once we start to drag. Okay, so let's say this is the item which I'm trying to drag. So this will be the event that will be emitted. So I can just create that method here. So let's call this drag start handler. Okay, and this is going to take in the event itself. Okay, so that is going to be of type drag event. Okay, so this is a built-in type within JavaScript, that is drag event, and this is going to return nothing. Okay, so we can just assign that to void, and also let's do the same for the drag end handler. Okay, again this is taking the event which is of type drag event, and this returns nothing. Okay, so we just want to assign this or make the class sign this particular contract of draggable, so which means that we are forced to use these two methods within our particular class that we are making the class sign this contract. Okay, so now I want to attach the draggable interface that we created to this to-do item class. Okay, so which is responsible for dragging and dropping. So we can now use the implements keyword, the draggable, like this. Okay, and immediately TypeScript gives us an error here saying that it doesn't implement the interface draggable. Okay, so which means that we just need to define these two methods over here. Okay, so that is the drag start handler and the drag end handler. Okay, so let's define that like this, and also for the drag end. Okay, so by doing this, if we now go back, you see that this box is still not draggable. Okay, so that is not sufficient enough to make this box draggable. So we just need to add a special attribute to this particular box within our HTML to make this a draggable item. Okay, so if we go back to our index.html, so this is the template which is responsible to render a single to do, right? So over here we can just add in a special attribute that is draggable and set this to true. Okay, so once I do this and go back, so now you see that, okay, I should give it another to do here, and you see that now I am able to drag and drop this. Okay, however this doesn't work yet. Okay, so since we haven't handled the drag events yet. Okay, so now if I just start to drag this, so this will emit an event called as drag start, and if I just leave the mouse, so that will emit an event called drag end. Okay, so we are going to handle these two events within this two methods that we created as a contract to this class, that is drag start and drag end. So now we can go to this configure method that we just defined, and it is left as blank. So this is the right place where we can manage all the event listeners. Okay, so let us attach an event listener to the element. So by add event listener, and here we just want to listen to the event called drag start. Okay, so if I set this, and we just need to now call a function that is this dot drag start handler. So this is the method that we created, and also using the interface. All right, and also we need to do the same for the drag end handler, basically when we leave the mouse. Okay, so let's change this to drag end and call drag end handler. All right, so once that's done, if I just now log the particular event to the console, I should be able to see the event. Okay, so basically details about the particular event that happened when we use the drag and drop. So now I can console log within this drag start handler by saying drag start, just to show that this event fires off. Okay, and the same over here as well. So let's change this to drag end, and now if I go back and try to add a to do. Okay, so now if I click on add to do, the moment I click on this and try to move this, you see that an event got fired off, that is drag start. Okay, so now if I leave the mouse, you see that another event got emitted, that is drag end. Okay, so we are going to leverage these two methods that we defined using the implements keyword, basically to make a class sign a contract for the drag start and drag end, basically these two methods, and we are going to work on this. All right, so now I want to create another interface for this to do input, the to do list, okay, that we have over here, to make sure that this is a valid drop target. Okay, so also we need to create another interface for that. So let's go right at the top and create another interface, and let's call this drag target. All right, and this will emit three events. Okay, one is the drag over handler, one is the drag handler itself, and one is the drag leave handler. So let us define those three here. So drag over handler, and which is going to be of type drag event. Again the same. Okay, so again this returns nothing. Okay, and the same let's duplicate for the drop handler itself. Okay, and then the drag leave handler. Okay, so I'll just explain what these three methods do, or the events. So let us consider this to be a box. Okay, so now if I just drag something inside that box, the event, that is drag over handler, that will be fired off. Okay, so if I just drag without dropping anything, so that event will be handled, and if I just drop within that box, so this event will be triggered, that is drop handler. And if I just leave my mouse over there, so the event drag leave handler will be fired off. Okay, so I hope that made sense. So this should be capital D. So now let's go to the to do list class, which is responsible to list all the to dos. Okay, so it's over here somewhere, yeah, right here. So now let us do the same over here. So that implements drag, that is drag target. All right, so to do list should implement the drag target interface. So let's now create those three methods over here. So that is drag leave handler, drag over handler, and the drop handler. All right, so you see that TypeScript also gives us some help over here, since it already knows the type of this. It just opened a function for us with the particular types. Okay, so now within the configure method, let us add an event listener to the particular element that is for the to do list. Okay, so this dot element dot add event listener, and we want to listen for the event called again the drag over this time. Okay, and call the this dot drag over handler. Okay, let's do the same for the other two as well. So this is going to be drag leave handler, and this dot drag leave handler. Okay, and finally the drop. Okay, so this is just called drop, and say drop handler. All right, so now we can just console log and check if these events are actually being emitted or not. So we can just put a console log saying drag leave handler triggered. let's do the same for the other two as well. So let's change this to drag over handler and this drop handler. Okay, so now if I just go back and try to create another to do. Okay, so now if I just try to drag this, you see that a lot of events are being emitted but not anywhere outside the box. So now if I just go inside the box, again the drag over handler is being emitted, so these many times. Okay, so this is the demo application. So I just wanted to show you one thing. So if I just try to start to drag this particular to do, you see that the background color changes of this. Okay, so now if I just try to leave that, so the background, the color gets disappeared. Okay, so this is a good feature where you can just get to know, okay, for the user, such that this is a valid drop target or not. Okay, so now if I just try to move this to the completed to dos, so you see that there is a class that has been applied, so that is for the background color. Okay, so if I just drop the to do here, you see that the background color remains intact. Okay, so I also want to add a particular class name that is for the background for this to do. Okay, so that is defined within my app.css, and that class name is called as droppable. Okay, so this particular class name, so that is what is giving this kind of bluish background color. So if I drag this to do to the particular finished to do, so I want to add in a class name that is droppable. Okay, so now if I go back to the event that is responsible for dragging over, okay, so it is right here. So for the drag over handler, so I just want to get rid of this and list element. Okay, so I can just call this list element just as we did this before. Okay, so we can just do the query selector on the element. So this dot element dot query selector, we now want to query select on the UL tag, because that is what is responsible to list all of our to dos within our to do list. Okay, and then here within this I want to add in a class name. Okay, so for the list id, list element dot class list dot add, and I just want to add in the class name of droppable. Okay, so now if I save this, I can just show you a problem what exactly will happen if I just try to do this, and if I just type in a title, description and number of hours. So now if I just try to do this, so it says that cannot read properties of undefined, that is reading query selector. So remember, we talked about the problem earlier that this keyword, okay, if we are attaching an event listener to that, so that this points at the event instead of the current class. Okay, so we already created that particular decorator that is for auto bind. So now we can just add in the decorator for this particular method over here. So I can just say @auto bind. So this will bind this keyword to this surrounding class. Okay, so now if I just go back and try again, so I should be able to successfully drag and drop, okay, and get the particular event. You see that now this class has been added. Okay, however, you see that I am not able to remove the class. Okay, so to fix that, we can now access the drag leave handler. Okay, so basically when we are leaving the to do at that particular box, so I still want to get access to the list element, so I can just copy this piece of code and I can just go right here. Okay, and over here, instead of adding the class name, I want to remove the class name of droppable. Okay, so with that saved, I can now go back and just add a to do. Okay, and now I click on add to do. So if I just take the to do and try to put it over here, so it says that it's giving me an error over here saying cannot read properties of undefined. So I told you the reason, right? So this keyword is pointing to the event rather than the class. Okay, so we can just reuse the auto bind decorator that we just created. Okay, so now this keyword is pointing at the surrounding class. So now if we try to create another to do and click on add, so I should now be able to point it over here. And now if I just take my mouse out of that, so you see that the class name is removed. Okay, so it adds and it removes. So when I enter into this box, so the class name is added. So if I remove, the drag leave handler is being triggered, so that will remove the class name of droppable. Okay, so you see that this is what is actually happening. TypeScript doesn't understand what is actually happening, okay, by dragging and dropping over here, but we as a user, we know that we are dragging from one box to another. So we haven't actually implemented that logic where we transfer the data from one box to the other. So basically from one class instance to the other class instance. Okay, so for that we can leverage the drag start handler, which we defined just for this particular box. Okay, so basically the to do item class. We can now go to the drag start handler, which is defined within the to do item class, and over here I can access the event object. Okay, so the event, this has a property called data transfer. Okay, so this is only applicable for events that is having the type drag event. Okay, so if the event type is drag, only then we have this type called data transfer. So basically when we want to transfer some data from one point to another, so we just need to set the data for that. Okay, so we have a method called set data, and over here we need to pass in two arguments to this function. One is the type of data that we want to send, and also what exactly we want to send. Okay, so the type of that is going to be text/plain. Okay, so other types would be like images and files and all that. Okay, so since we just want to send in plain text, we just type in here plain text, and the data that we want to just send is the id. Okay, which is the unique thing that will differentiate between other to-dos. Okay, so that id we just created using the math.random library. So this id here, which we create using the math.random library, so here we can just pass in the this dot to do dot id. Okay, and remember, since we are using the this keyword, we need to surround the this keyword to point at this class. Okay, so we can reuse the auto bind again here, and with that now we can set another property to this drag start, that is event dot data transfer again. Okay, and also we want to specify the effect allowed. Okay, so you get some suggestions also over here. So effect allowed, and that is going to be move. Okay, and we just need to set this to a you see we get different effects. Okay, so since we are dragging and dropping, so we don't want that move effect, right? So I'm just going to specify move over here, and this gives me an error here for some reason. So maybe I need to remove this question mark here. And okay, so we know for certainty that this data transfer will always exist for the event type, that is drag event. So maybe I can replace this question mark with the exclamation, which means that this will always exist. So we can now go to the drop handler, where exactly we want to drop. Okay, so basically when we take out our cursor out of the box, and that is where the the data is being dropped, and we just need to call the get data method on the data transfer event. Okay, so we can just go right inside this and get the to do id. Okay, so that's what we are actually transferring, right? So we can just set this to the event dot data transfer, and this time we want to get data, and we just need to specify the data which we are getting in the format, so that is text/plain. Okay, so the user can drag and drop any data for that matter, so that's why we want to specify only what kind of data should be transferred. So we can just set that to text/plain, and we can now just put a console log to see the to do id if we are actually getting or not. Okay, so now we can just test this out. So now if I drag and drop the to do to the finished to dos, you see that I do not get any console log. Okay, so the reason behind this is this drop handler will not be fired because the default behavior of the browser. Okay, so that we just need to prevent that. So we need to go to the drag over handler, and over there we just need to specify the event.prevent default. Okay, so basically the browser does not allow anything to be drag and dropped inside a particular element within our DOM. Okay, so we just want to prevent that default behavior, and we want to allow something to be dropped inside that particular element. Okay, so the element itself is the to-do list. Okay, so only for that we are preventing, and not for any other else. Okay, so with that we can now test this again. So now if I drag and drop, I should be able to get the id. Okay, so there we go. So we are now getting the id of this to do. So using the help of this id, we can fetch the particular to do and display it on the finished to dos. Okay, and also we need to remove the to do that was already counted as in progress. Okay, and also we need to update the state as well from in progress to finished. And previously, if you notice, this drop handler wasn't triggering. Okay, so I forgot to tell you that, and now it has been triggered. Okay, so that's if you would have noticed that. Okay, so now let's move ahead. So let us now finish the missing piece of this puzzle, that is to actually move the to dos from in progress to finished. Okay, apart from just logging the id to the console, also we need to change the status of this to do from in progress to finished. Okay, so for that I can create another method within our state, which is managing for the to dos, right? So it is right below this, And apart from the method which is responsible to add a to do, I also want to create a method which is responsible to move the to do. Okay, so if you want, you can also say this as changing the status from active to finished or something like that. So we can just name this however you want. We can call this move to do, and this is going to be receiving two arguments. So one is the id of the to do itself. Okay, so we are just going to loop across all the to dos and find out the actual to do based on the id. So to do id, and this is going to be of type string, and then we are going to receive the status. Okay, status of the to do, or we can call this new status because, or updated status, since we are going to update the status of that. And like I can just drag and drop within the same box. Okay, so the status may or may not be updated from in progress to finished, or vice versa. Okay, so we also need the status as well. Okay, not just true or false value whether the to do is moved or not, like that. So we need the actual status itself, so which is going to be of the type that we created, that is to do status, or the enum type. Okay, so this is status, and within this method we are going to fetch the to do by looping across our to dos. Okay, so I can call this to do and get access to this dot to dos dot find, and we want to find based on the id, right? So for every to do we want to check on the id, to do dot id, and if that is equal to the to do id that is been passed in, like this. And this to do may or may not be found. Okay, so we just need to check if this to do exists. Then we just want to update its status from whatever it's passed in, so to do dot status, and set that to the new status, like this. And now something is changed within our to do, right? So we just need to inform other classes that are listening to the state to re-render the particular, to make a re-render basically. Okay, so for this I can call this again. Okay, or maybe I can cut this and create another private method for updating the listeners. So I can create a private method here which is only used internally within this class. So let's call this update listeners, and we just need to paste in the particular code, and here we can just call this dot update listeners. And also once we have changed the to do status, we can call this dot update listeners, like this. Okay, so with that done, now we can go to the class where we are finally dropping the to do. Okay, so we just need to call the move to do method right inside the drop handler. So we can say to do state dot move to do, and then we just need to pass in two things, that is the to do id and the status itself. So let's pass in to do id and the new status. So wherever we drop the to do, that will have a type, right? When for every to do list, when we create an instance, so either the type is in progress or finished. Okay, so we just need to check for these values. So we can put a check here. So if this dot type, and if that is equal to in progress, and then we pass in the enum type, so that is to do status dot in progress, and if that is false, then we pass in the to do status dot completed or finished. Okay, so let's put a question mark here, else to do status dot finished. All right, so this to do id may also be undefined, so we can just put a check over here. So if to do id, only then we are going to do this operation. Okay, so with that saved, now we can finally give it a test. So let's create a to do now, and okay, so now if I drag and drop to the finished to dos, and that works. Okay, so now if I just switch this back to in progress, that doesn't work for some reason. I think I need to auto bind the drop handler as well, because we are using the this dot type over here, and the this refers to the basically the event and not the surrounding class. Okay, so let's reuse the auto bind, and now let's give this a final test. Okay, so that works. So let me create another to do and just test if everything is working as expected. So I can drag this and this as well, and do the same. Okay, if I also create another to do just for my satisfaction, yeah, so everything works as expected, and it is only dragging and dropping those to dos that I am actually dragging. Okay, so everything seems to work perfectly fine, and this is all about this application. So we have learned a lot of features within TypeScript. Okay, so I guess I have covered every single bit of TypeScript that we use inside JavaScript. Okay, so I'm sorry if I missed anything. Okay, so this is all about it. I know this file is about how many lines of code, about 370 lines of code, and this is not the ideal way of writing code. Okay, so basically you would split the components into its own files and then make the import and export. Okay, so all of this we are going to explore in the next video, where we discuss about the namespaces and modules basically inside TypeScript. So feel free to add in some special features like deleting the to do, or creating a database and then adding the to do over there. So you can just explore some more options and practice TypeScript even and more and more, so that you get practice, and it will using TypeScript would be a breeze for you. Okay, so this is all about this particular part of the video. So this is just the part 1, and in the next module we are just going to reorganize this particular file into its own modules, and then we are going to import it in the main file and then use it over there. Okay, so that our code is much more organized, and it will be developer friendly as well, and also we can just search for that piece of code which we are going to work upon. Okay, and you see that if I want to make a change, I need to go over in the entire code and then find out that. So this is a very difficult thing for any other developer to come and have a look at this code. So that is why we are going to refactor all of this in the next video. Okay, so for now, if you have any questions, or if I left anything which could be a valid video to make upon, so you can just let me know in the comments, or any questions, feel free to do that. And I hope you enjoyed the video and got to learn a lot within this first part of this TypeScript course. So that's it for this video. Thank you so much for watching. If you haven't subscribed, please do so, and so that you get notified about any video that I upload after this, and get a lot to learn. Okay, so see you in the next video.